Welcome back. Tonight, we're venturing into the heart of Africa, where sleep isn't just rest, it's the most vulnerable time of your entire existence. In African traditional beliefs, the moment you close your eyes, you enter a realm where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds dissolve completely. You see, across African cultures, sleep has always been understood as a time of profound spiritual vulnerability. One traditional African concept of witchcraft believes an evil spirit in a person leaves the body during sleep hours to participate in activities with other witches and returns to the body before the person awakens. But it's not just about spirits leaving your body, it's about what can enter when you're defenseless. In many African traditions, the positioning of your sleeping space, particularly your head's orientation, determines whether you'll wake up the next morning as yourself or something else entirely. The door isn't just an entrance to your room. It's a threshold between worlds, a gateway that malevolent spirits use to enter our physical realm. And if your head points toward that threshold while you sleep, you're essentially offering yourself as a host. Traditional healers across the continent, Sangomas in South Africa, Babalawos in Nigeria, traditional diviners in Ghana, they all know the same fundamental truth. Mustard seeds sprinkled around the bed before going to sleep will protect someone from a buhag, a person who can astral travel and leave their body at will and attack people in their sleep, from draining their life force. But even these protections fail if you position yourself incorrectly. The stories we're sharing tonight come from documented cases where people ignored these ancient warnings. A university student in Lagos who thought traditional beliefs were backward superstition. A mining engineer in Johannesburg who dismissed his grandmother's sleeping arrangements. A teacher in Accra who moved her bed to face the door for better feng shui. A development worker in Kampala who refused to follow local customs. Each of them learned the same terrifying lesson. In Africa, your sleeping position isn't just about comfort, it's about survival. Because in traditional African spirituality, the night belongs to forces that modern medicine can't explain and Western psychology can't treat. During the hours when your conscious mind retreats, other consciousnesses are looking for empty vessels to inhabit. And if you sleep with your head pointing toward the door, toward that spiritual gateway, you're giving them a clear path straight into your mind. Tonight's stories are documented accounts of what happens when you ignore thousands of years of African spiritual wisdom. They're testimonies collected by traditional healers, witnessed by families, and recorded by people who survived experiences that changed their understanding of reality forever. So, before you go to sleep tonight, remember this. In Africa, the spirits of ancestors have the power to influence and protect the living, but only if you show them proper respect. Position yourself correctly. Follow the ancient protocols. Listen to the warnings. Because once a malevolent spirit finds its way into your dreams, waking up becomes the least of your problems. Adedora Okeke was the kind of student who prided herself on being modern, educated, and rational. At 22, she was in her final year studying psychology at the University of Lagos, writing her thesis on cognitive behavioral approaches to treating superstitious thinking in rural Nigerian communities. She was brilliant, ambitious, and convinced that education had freed her from what she called primitive thinking. That attitude would nearly cost her everything. When Adedora moved into her new off-campus apartment in Yaba, she was thrilled to finally have her own space. The flat was small but modern, with a single bedroom that had large windows and what she considered an ideal layout. There was just one problem. Her grandmother, Mama Nkechi, insisted on visiting to bless the space before Adedora settled in. Mama Nkechi was a traditional woman from Anambra State who had spent her entire life following Igbo customs. The moment she stepped into Adedora's bedroom, her face darkened with concern. "Ada," she said in Igbo, using Adeora's pet name, "you cannot put your bed like this. Your head is pointing toward the door. This is very dangerous." Adedora looked at her bed placement with confusion. She had positioned it against the far wall so she could see anyone entering her room, a safety measure she'd learned in her personal security class. "Mama, it's fine. I can see the door from here. If someone breaks in, I'll be ready." But Mama Nkechi was insistent. "You don't understand, child. In our tradition, when you sleep with your head toward the door, you invite spirits to enter your mind. The door is a threshold. Evil things use it to cross from their world into ours." Adedora felt her patience wearing thin. Here she was, writing a thesis about eliminating superstitious thinking, and her own grandmother was trying to impose these beliefs on her. "Mama, with all due respect, these are old beliefs from a time when people didn't understand science. I study psychology. I know how the mind works. There are no spirits trying to enter my head. Mama Nkechi's expression grew more serious. Ada, I'm telling you this because I love you. In traditional African spirituality, the night belongs to forces that modern medicine can't explain and Western psychology can't treat. At least, let me put some protection around your room. Adadora declined politely but firmly. She was an educated woman living in the 21st century. She wasn't going to rearrange her apartment based on what she considered medieval superstitions. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Adadora loved her new independence, her study space, and her carefully arranged bedroom. She slept well, woke up refreshed, and made excellent progress on her thesis. Then the dream started. It began subtly strange dreams where Adadora would find herself standing in her bedroom, watching herself sleep. In these dreams, she could see her own body lying on the bed, but she felt like she was floating near the ceiling, looking down. At first, she dismissed these as lucid dreams or out-of-body experiences that she'd studied in her abnormal psychology classes. But the dreams became more frequent and more disturbing. In the dreams, Adadora would see things entering her room through the doorway, shadow figures that moved with purpose toward her sleeping body. She would try to scream, to warn herself, but no sound would come out. She would watch helplessly as these shadows approached her bed. Adadora began waking up exhausted, as if she hadn't slept at all. Her academic performance started declining. She found herself having trouble concentrating, remembering things, and even completing basic tasks. More disturbing, she began experiencing what she could only describe as personality slips. Friends noticed that Adadora would sometimes speak in voices that didn't sound like her own. During conversations, she would suddenly switch to speaking in deep, masculine tones, or her facial expressions would change completely, becoming aggressive or predatory in ways that were completely unlike her gentle personality. Adadora, are you feeling okay? Her best friend Chika asked one afternoon when Adadora had spent 10 minutes speaking about herself in the third person. You've been acting really strange lately. Adadora had no memory of these episodes. To her, these conversations felt perfectly normal, but everyone around her was becoming increasingly concerned. The breaking point came during a late-night study session. Adadora was working on her thesis when she began hearing voices coming from her bedroom, not voices from outside, voices that seemed to be coming from inside the room itself, speaking in languages she didn't recognize. When she went to investigate, she found her bedroom empty, but the voices continued. They seemed to be having conversations about her, discussing her personality, her memories, her fears. The voices were coming from the direction of her bed. That's when Adadora realized with horror that the voices sounded like her own voice, but saying things she wasn't thinking, expressing opinions she didn't hold, discussing experiences she didn't remember having. Terrified, she called Mama Nkechi. Mama, something is wrong with me. I'm hearing voices and people say I'm acting strangely. I think I need to see a doctor. Mama Nkechi listened to Adara's description with growing alarm. Ada, how long has this been happening? About 6 weeks now. It started with weird dreams, but now it's happening while I'm awake. Child, you need to come home immediately. Don't sleep in that room tonight. And when you get here, I'm taking you to see Dibia Uche. Dibia Uche was a traditional healer whom Mama Nkechi had consulted for decades. When Adadora reluctantly agreed to the consultation, the elderly man took one look at her and immediately began shaking his head. This girl has been sharing her body with spirits, he said gravely, consulting his divination bones. She has been sleeping in a position that makes her vulnerable. The spirits enter through the doorway and find an easy path to her mind because her head points toward their entry point. What Dibia Uche explained made Adadora's blood run cold. According to traditional Igbo beliefs, when someone sleeps with their head pointing toward a doorway, they create what he called a spiritual highway between their consciousness and the spirit realm. Malevolent entities could travel along this pathway directly into a person's mind, gradually taking over their personality and memories. The spirits have been living inside her head for weeks now, he continued. That's why she has gaps in memory and personality changes. They are learning to be her. The cleansing ritual took 3 days and involved elaborate ceremonies that Adadora's scientific mind struggled to accept, but the results were undeniable. During the ritual, when Dibia Uche called for the spirits to leave, Adadora found herself speaking in voices and languages she didn't know, expressing violent thoughts that terrified her and describing memories of events she had never experienced. "I can see through walls," she heard herself say in a voice that wasn't her own. "I know where you keep your money. I know your real name, not the one you tell people." When the ritual was complete, Adidora felt like herself for the first time in months. The exhaustion lifted, the confusion cleared. Most importantly, the voices stopped. Dibia Uche gave her specific instructions for setting up her bedroom. Never sleep with your head pointing toward the door. Place your bed so your head faces a solid wall. Keep a bowl of salt water near the doorway and change it every 3 days. And understand this, your education is important, but it should complement our traditional wisdom, not replace it. Today, Adidora still lives in Lagos and has completed her psychology degree, but her thesis topic changed. She now studies the integration of traditional African healing practices with modern mental health treatment. Her apartment is arranged according to traditional principles, and she regularly consults with both therapists and traditional healers. "I learned that just because science can't yet explain something doesn't mean it isn't real," she says. "My psychology training helps me understand the mind, but my grandmother's wisdom helps me protect it." Adidora never forgot the lessons she learned during those terrifying weeks. In African tradition, respect for spiritual protocols isn't superstition, it's survival. And when you ignore the wisdom of your ancestors, you risk sharing your mind with entities that have no business being there. Thabo Mthembu had always been a problem solver. As a mechanical engineer working for one of South Africa's largest mining companies, he approached life with logic, data, and systematic thinking. When he transferred from Durban to take a senior position at a platinum mine near Rustenburg, Thabo was focused on one thing: optimizing extraction efficiency and advancing his career. What he didn't expect was to become a case study in the spiritual consequences of ignoring traditional sleeping arrangements. The company provided Thabo with housing in a modern residential complex designed for senior staff. The apartments were spacious, well-appointed, and built to contemporary standards. Thabo was particularly pleased with his bedroom, which featured large windows and what he considered optimal furniture placement. When his elderly mother, Mam Thembu, came to visit from KwaZulu-Natal for his housewarming, she was impressed with the apartment's modern amenities. But when she saw his bedroom, her expression changed from pride to concern. "Thabo, my son, why is your bed facing the door like this? This is not how we sleep." Thabo looked at his bed position with confusion. He had placed it against the far wall with the headboard facing the doorway, allowing him to see the entire room and maintain what he considered good security awareness. "Mama, it's the most logical position. I can see if anyone enters, and the feng shui book I read said this creates good energy flow." Mam Thembu shook her head vigorously. "No, no, no, this is very dangerous. In our Zulu tradition, when you sleep with your head toward the door, you make yourself vulnerable to spiritual attacks. The doorway is where spirits enter and leave. You are pointing your mind directly at their pathway." Thabo felt his patience being tested. He respected his mother, but he was a man of science. "Mama, I appreciate our cultural traditions, but I don't believe in spiritual attacks. I believe in engineering, physics, and rational thinking. My bed placement is based on practical safety considerations." Mam Thembu looked deeply worried. "Thabo, you can believe in engineering and still respect the wisdom of our ancestors. Please, at least let me ask a Sangoma to put protection around your home." Thabo politely declined. He was a successful professional living in a gated community with security guards and alarm systems. He didn't need spiritual protection from imaginary threats. For the first month, Thabo settled well into his new position. He was making significant improvements to mining operations, earning recognition from management, and enjoying his elevated lifestyle. His sleep was deep and uninterrupted. Then the experiences began. It started with what Thabo initially dismissed as sleep paralysis. He would wake up in the middle of the night unable to move, feeling a heavy presence pressing down on his chest. During these episodes, he could see his room clearly but couldn't speak or move his body. Thabo had read about sleep paralysis in medical literature and assumed it was stress-related, but the episodes became more frequent and more disturbing. During these nighttime paralysis events, Thabo began seeing figures in his room, tall, dark shapes that would stand near his doorway and slowly move toward his bed. The figures seemed to be studying him, discussing him in low voices that he couldn't quite understand. More disturbingly, Thabo began experiencing what he could only describe as missing time. He would go to bed at his usual time and wake up exhausted, with vague memories of being awake for hours during the night, but he couldn't remember what he had been doing during those hours. His work performance began suffering. Thabo found himself making calculation errors that were completely uncharacteristic. During meetings, colleagues noticed that he would sometimes zone out completely, staring blankly for minutes at a time before snapping back to attention with no memory of the gap. "Thabo, are you feeling all right?" his supervisor asked after Thabo had submitted a report with critical mathematical errors. "This isn't like you. Maybe you should take some leave and see a doctor." But the most frightening changes were happening to Thabo's personality. Friends and colleagues began noting that he would sometimes speak and behave in ways that seemed completely unlike him. During social gatherings, he would make aggressive comments that shocked people who knew him as gentle and thoughtful. His sense of humor became dark and cruel. His generally optimistic outlook turned cynical and bitter. The breaking point came during a video call with his mother. Mam Thembu had called for their weekly conversation, but what she saw on the screen terrified her. "Thabo, your eyes look different. Your face looks different. You don't look like my son." Thabo looked at himself in the video call window and was shocked by what he saw. His own face seemed foreign to him. The expression was cold and predatory, completely unlike his normal appearance. As he watched his reflection, he saw his facial expression changing in ways that he wasn't controlling. "Mama, I think something is wrong with me. I'm having strange experiences at night, and people say I'm acting differently. I think I might be having a nervous breakdown." Mam Thembu listened to Thabo's account with growing alarm. "My son, this is not a nervous breakdown. This is what I was worried about. You need to come home immediately, and we need to see Baba Mthunzi." Baba Mthunzi was a respected Sangoma whom the family had consulted for generations. When Thabo reluctantly agreed to the consultation, the traditional healer took one look at him and immediately began preparing protective herbs. "This man is being occupied by spirits," Baba Mthunzi said after consulting his divination bones. "He has been sleeping in a way that allows them easy access to his mind. The spirits enter through the doorway and travel directly into his consciousness because his head points toward their entry point." What Baba Mthunzi explained challenged everything Thabo thought he understood about reality. According to Zulu spiritual tradition, when a person sleeps with their head pointing toward a doorway, they create what the Sangoma called a spiritual channel between their consciousness and the realm where malevolent entities exist. The spirits have been studying him for weeks, Baba Mthunzi continued. They enter his mind while he sleeps and learn his personality, his memories, his way of thinking. Gradually, they begin to replace his consciousness with their own. The cleansing process was intense and took several days. It involved elaborate rituals that included steaming with special herbs, induced vomiting to remove spiritual contamination, and ceremonies designed to sever the connection between Thabo and the entities that had been inhabiting his mind. During the cleansing, Thabo experienced phenomena that his engineering background couldn't explain. He found himself speaking in languages he didn't know, demonstrating knowledge about people and places he had never encountered, and expressing violent impulses that were completely foreign to his nature. "I can see inside machines," he heard himself say in a voice that wasn't his own. "I know how to break things that look unbreakable. I know weaknesses you don't know you have." When the ritual was complete, Thabo felt mentally clear for the first time in months. The personality changes stopped, the missing time episodes ended, most importantly, the nightly visitations ceased. Baba Mthunzi gave him specific instructions for protecting his sleeping space. Never sleep with your head pointing toward any doorway or opening. Position your bed so your head faces a solid wall. Place protective herbs near the entrance to your room and burn cleansing incense weekly. Most importantly, understand that your scientific knowledge is powerful, but it must work alongside spiritual wisdom, not against it. Today, Thabo continues his successful engineering career, but his perspective has fundamentally changed. He now consults with both technical experts and traditional healers when making important decisions. His apartment is arranged according to traditional principles, and he regularly participates in cultural ceremonies. "I learned that there are aspects of reality that engineering school doesn't teach," he says. "My technical knowledge helps me understand how physical systems work, but traditional wisdom helps me understand how spiritual systems work. Ignoring either one leaves you vulnerable." Thabo's experience taught him a lesson that would reshape his entire worldview. In African spirituality, proper sleeping arrangements aren't just about comfort or even security, they're about maintaining control over your own consciousness. And when you ignore spiritual protocols, you risk sharing your mind with entities that have their own agenda. Grace Asante considered herself a bridge between worlds. As a 34-year-old high school teacher in Accra, Ghana, she taught literature and social studies, helping her students navigate between traditional Ghanaian values and modern global perspectives. Grace had grown up respecting her Akan cultural heritage while pursuing Western education, and she prided herself on being able to balance both approaches to life. That balance would be tested in ways she never imagined. When Grace moved into her new apartment in East Legon, she was excited about the modern amenities and convenient location. The flat was in a recently constructed building designed for young professionals with contemporary layouts and what the landlord advertised as internationally inspired interior design. Grace spent weeks carefully arranging her space to reflect her personal aesthetic, a blend of traditional Akan symbols and modern furnishings. She was particularly pleased with her bedroom arrangement, which featured her bed positioned to provide what she considered optimal natural lighting and airflow. When her aunt, Auntie Akosua, came to visit for the apartment blessing ceremony, she was initially impressed with Grace's tasteful decorating. But when they entered the bedroom, Auntie Akosua's expression shifted from approval to alarm. "Gracie, what is this? Why are you sleeping with your head pointing toward the door? This is not how we arrange our sleeping spaces." Grace looked at her bed position with confusion. She had placed it against the far wall with the headboard facing the doorway, allowing her to see the entire room and enjoy the cross breeze from the window. "Auntie, I positioned it for the best airflow and lighting. Plus, I read in a design magazine that facing the door creates positive energy flow." Auntie Akosua shook her head emphatically. "No, child. In our Akan tradition, when you sleep with your head toward the door, you create a direct pathway for malevolent spirits to enter your mind. The doorway is a threshold between the physical and spiritual worlds. You are pointing your consciousness directly at danger." Grace respected her aunt's knowledge of traditional customs, but she also valued her education and personal preferences. "Auntie, I appreciate our cultural wisdom, but I've studied psychology and sleep science. Proper air circulation and psychological comfort are important for good rest. I don't believe in spirit attacks during sleep." Auntie Akosua looked troubled. "Grace, you can value modern knowledge and still protect yourself according to our ancestral wisdom. These beliefs exist because our people learned hard lessons over many generations. Please, at least let me bring a traditional healer to bless your space and provide protection." Grace politely declined. She was an educated professional who made decisions based on research and rational analysis. While she respected traditional culture in many areas of her life, she drew the line at rearranging her personal space based on what she considered outdated beliefs about spiritual threats. For the first several weeks, Grace was delighted with her new living situation. She slept well, had energy for her demanding teaching schedule, and felt creatively inspired in her thoughtfully arranged space. Then, the dreams began. Initially, Grace experienced what seemed like unusually vivid dreams, where she would find herself floating above her bed, looking down at her own sleeping body. In these dreams, she could see her room in perfect detail, but she felt detached from her physical form. Grace had studied out-of-body experiences in her psychology courses and assumed she was experiencing a form of lucid dreaming, but the dreams became progressively more disturbing. In her nightly visions, Grace began seeing figures entering her room through the doorway, tall, shadowy forms that moved with deliberate purpose toward her sleeping body. She would try to return to her body to wake herself up, but found herself unable to move or speak. Grace started waking up feeling drained, as if she had been working all night instead of resting. Her teaching performance began declining. Students noticed that she would sometimes lose track of her lectures mid-sentence, staring blankly at the classroom before continuing with completely different topics. More concerning, Grace began experiencing what her colleagues described as personality shifts. During staff meetings, she would sometimes speak in authoritative tones that seemed unlike her normally collaborative style. Her lesson plans became increasingly focused on dark themes of power, control, and submission. "Grace, are you feeling stressed lately?" asked her department head, Mrs. Opong. After Grace had taught a literature class that focused exclusively on themes of possession and loss of identity. "Your teaching style has become quite intense recently, and some parents have expressed concerns." Grace had no memory of teaching lessons that were dramatically different from her usual approach. To her, her classes felt perfectly normal, but students and parents were reporting that she was discussing disturbing concepts that seemed inappropriate for high school literature courses. The situation escalated when Grace began experiencing episodes of missing time during her waking hours. She would start a conversation with a colleague and suddenly find herself in a different location with no memory of how she had gotten there. During these episodes, security cameras at the school captured her walking through hallways and interacting with people in ways that seemed purposeful but which she couldn't remember. The breaking point came during a parent-teacher conference. Grace was meeting with the parents of one of her students when she began speaking about the child in ways that demonstrated knowledge she shouldn't have possessed. Your daughter has fears about the dark that stem from an incident when she was 6 years old, Grace found herself saying. She still checks under her bed for the things she saw that night, and your marriage is struggling because of financial pressures you haven't told anyone about. The parents were shocked. Grace had accurately described private family information that no one at the school could possibly have known. When they asked how she knew these details, Grace was equally shocked to realize she had no memory of speaking about their personal lives. Terrified by her own behavior, Grace called Auntie Akosua. "Auntie, something is happening to me. I'm saying and doing things I don't remember, and I'm knowing things I shouldn't know. I think I might be having a mental breakdown." Auntie Akosua listened to Grace's account with growing concern. "Grace, this is not a mental breakdown. This is exactly what I was worried about. You need to come home immediately and we need to see Okomfo Agyeman." Okomfo Agyeman was a respected traditional priest whom the family had consulted for generations. When Grace reluctantly agreed to the consultation, the priest took one look at her and immediately began preparing protective rituals. "This woman is being inhabited by spiritual entities," Okomfo Agyeman said after consulting his divination stones. "She has been sleeping in a position that allows them easy access to her consciousness. The spirits enter through the doorway and travel directly into her mind because her head points toward their pathway." What Okomfo Agyeman explained challenged Grace's understanding of reality. According to Akan spiritual tradition, when someone sleeps with their head pointing toward a doorway, they create what he called a spiritual highway between their mind and the realm where entities without physical bodies exist. "The spirits have been using her mind as their dwelling place," the priest continued. "They enter while she sleeps and gradually learn to control her thoughts, her words, and her actions. They are replacing her personality with their own." The cleansing process was elaborate and took place over several days. It involved rituals designed to sever the connection between Grace and the entities that had been occupying her consciousness, including ceremonies with traditional drums, protective herbs, and elaborate purification rites. During the cleansing, Grace experienced phenomena that her educational background couldn't explain. She found herself speaking in languages she didn't recognize, demonstrating knowledge about people and events she had never encountered, and expressing thoughts that felt foreign to her own mind. "I can see what people think before they say it," she heard herself saying in a voice that wasn't quite her own. "I know their secrets, their fears, their hidden desires. I can influence their decisions if I choose to." When the ritual was complete, Grace felt like herself for the first time in months. The personality changes stopped, the missing time episodes ended. Most importantly, the invasive knowledge about other people's private lives disappeared. Okomfo Agyeman gave her specific instructions for protecting her sleeping space. Never sleep with your head pointing toward any opening or doorway. Position your bed so your head faces a solid wall. Place protective symbols near the entrance to your room and perform weekly cleansing rituals. Most importantly, understand that education and traditional wisdom must work together, not in opposition. Today, Grace continues her teaching career with a dramatically expanded perspective. She now incorporates lessons about traditional Ghanaian spiritual practices into her curriculum and regularly consults with both educational specialists and traditional healers when developing her teaching methods. "I learned that there are forms of knowledge that can't be found in textbooks," she says. "My education helps me understand how to teach effectively, but traditional wisdom helps me understand how to protect my students and myself from influences that go beyond the classroom." Grace's experience taught her a fundamental lesson about the relationship between modern education and ancestral wisdom. In African spirituality, proper sleeping arrangements aren't just about physical comfort. They're about maintaining control over your own thoughts and protecting your consciousness from entities that have no business accessing your mind. Dr. Sarah Johnson had spent her career believing that compassion and scientific knowledge could solve any problem. As a 38-year-old public health specialist from Minneapolis, she had worked in humanitarian crises across 3 continents. bringing medical expertise and development resources to communities in need. When she accepted a 2-year assignment with an international NGO in Kampala, Uganda, Sarah was confident that her experience and education had prepared her for any challenge. She was wrong. Sarah's assignment involved improving maternal health outcomes in rural communities surrounding Lake Victoria. The work was demanding but rewarding, and she was making measurable progress in reducing infant mortality rates through improved prenatal care and training local health workers. When she moved into her assigned housing, a modern apartment in Kampala's Kololo neighborhood, Sarah was impressed with the accommodations. The flat was spacious, well-equipped, and designed to Western standards. She was particularly pleased with her bedroom, which she arranged to maximize efficiency and comfort based on her years of experience living in various international postings. When Sarah mentioned her living arrangements to Dr. Margaret Nalubega, a Ugandan colleague who served as her cultural liaison, Margaret asked to visit the apartment to ensure everything was suitable for long-term residents. Margaret was initially pleased with the apartment's amenities and location, but when they entered the bedroom, her expression changed from approval to concern. "Sarah, why have you placed your bed facing the doorway like this? This arrangement is not safe according to our traditional beliefs." Sarah looked at her bed position with puzzlement. She had positioned it against the far wall with the headboard facing the door, allowing her to see the entire room and maintain situational awareness, a security practice she had learned during previous postings in unstable regions. "Margaret, this is the safest position from a security standpoint. I can see if anyone enters, and it provides good access to the window if I need to exit quickly." Margaret shook her head with obvious worry. "I understand your security concerns, but in Ugandan tradition, when you sleep with your head pointing toward the door, you make yourself vulnerable to spiritual attacks. The doorway is where spirits travel between worlds. You are directing your mind toward their pathway." Sarah appreciated Margaret's concern, but her worldview was grounded in evidence-based medicine and rational analysis. "Margaret, I respect local customs, but I don't believe in spiritual attacks. I believe in practical security measures, proper hygiene, and scientific approaches to health and safety. My bed placement is based on emergency response protocols." Margaret looked deeply troubled. "Sarah, you can use scientific approaches and still respect our spiritual wisdom. These beliefs exist because our people have experienced real consequences when they ignore them. Please, at least allow me to arrange for a traditional healer to provide protection for your home." Sarah politely declined. She was a medical professional trained to distinguish between correlation and causation, between cultural beliefs and empirical reality. While she respected local customs in her professional work, she made personal decisions based on scientific evidence and practical considerations. For the first 2 months, Sarah thrived in her new environment. She was making significant improvements to maternal health programs, building strong relationships with local health workers, and adapting well to Ugandan culture and customs. Her sleep was restful and restorative. Then the experiences began. Sarah started having what she initially classified as unusually vivid dreams. In these dreams, she would find herself standing in her bedroom, watching her own body sleeping on the bed. During these experiences, she felt completely conscious and aware, but detached from her physical form. As a medical professional, Sarah was familiar with literature on out-of-body experiences and sleep disorders. She assumed she was experiencing a form of hypnagogic hallucination brought on by stress and adaptation to a new environment. But the dreams became progressively more disturbing. During her nightly out-of-body experiences, Sarah began seeing figures entering her room through the doorway, tall, dark shapes that moved with deliberate purpose toward her sleeping body. She would try to re-enter her body, to wake herself up, but found herself unable to move or speak. Sarah began waking up feeling exhausted, as if she had been working all night instead of resting. Her professional performance started declining. Colleagues noticed that she would sometimes lose focus during important meetings, staring blankly for extended periods before resuming conversations on completely different topics. More concerning, Sarah began experiencing what her Ugandan colleagues described as personality changes. During community health meetings, she would sometimes speak with authority about local spiritual practices and traditional healing methods that she had never studied or discussed. "Dr. Sarah, you seem to have developed extensive knowledge about our traditional medicine," observed Dr. Nalubega, after Sarah had led a detailed discussion about herbal treatments and spiritual healing practices. "When did you study these topics?" Sarah was puzzled by the question. To her, the conversations felt perfectly normal. But colleagues were noting that she was demonstrating knowledge about Ugandan spiritual practices that was far beyond what any outsider could have learned in a few months. The situation escalated when Sarah began accurately diagnosing patients using traditional African healing methods that she had no training in. During routine medical examinations, she would identify spiritual causes for physical ailments and recommend traditional treatments alongside conventional medicine. This woman's illness is caused by conflict with her ancestors, Sarah found herself telling a patient's family. She needs traditional cleansing rituals in addition to the antibiotics. The medicine will treat her body, but the spiritual work will address the root cause. The family was amazed. Sarah had accurately identified spiritual and social issues that no foreign doctor could possibly have known about. When her colleagues asked how she had developed this diagnostic ability, Sarah was equally amazed to realize she had no memory of learning traditional healing methods. The breaking point came during a community health meeting, where Sarah began speaking in fluent Luganda, a language she had never studied, and providing detailed advice about traditional birthing practices that demonstrated intimate knowledge of local customs. When the meeting ended and colleagues asked about her unexpected fluency in Luganda, Sarah was shocked to realize she had no memory of speaking in the local language or discussing traditional birthing practices. Frightened by her own behavior, Sarah called Dr. Nalubega. "Margaret, something strange is happening to me. I'm saying and doing things I don't remember, and I'm demonstrating knowledge about traditional practices that I've never studied. I think I might be experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown." Dr. Nalubega listened to Sarah's account with growing concern. "Sarah, this is not a psychological breakdown. This is exactly what I was worried about when I saw your sleeping arrangement. You need to see Mama Nakato immediately." Mama Nakato was a respected traditional healer whom Dr. Nalubega's family had consulted for generations. When Sarah reluctantly agreed to the consultation, the elderly woman took one look at her and immediately began preparing protective rituals. "This Mzungu has been sharing her mind with our ancestral spirits," Mama Nakato said after consulting her divination bones. "She has been sleeping in a position that allows them easy access to her consciousness. The spirits enter through the doorway and travel directly into her mind because her head points toward their pathway." What Mama Nakato explained challenged everything Sarah thought she understood about consciousness and reality. According to Ugandan spiritual tradition, when someone sleeps with their head pointing toward a doorway, they create what the healer called a spiritual bridge between their mind and the realm where ancestral spirits and other entities exist. The spirits have been teaching her our traditional knowledge, Mama Nakato continued, but they have also been gradually taking control of her thoughts and actions. She is becoming a vessel for their presence in the physical world. The cleansing process was elaborate and took place over several days. It involved rituals designed to separate Sarah's consciousness from the entities that had been sharing her mind, including ceremonies with traditional music, protective herbs, and elaborate purification rites. During the cleansing, Sarah experienced phenomena that her medical training couldn't explain. She found herself speaking in multiple Ugandan languages she had never learned, demonstrating detailed knowledge about traditional healing practices she had never studied, and providing accurate information about people and events she had no way of knowing about. "I can see illness before it manifests," she heard herself saying in a voice that carried an accent and intonation pattern that wasn't her own. "I know which herbs will heal and which will harm. I can communicate with the spirits of the dead." When the ritual was complete, Sarah felt mentally clear for the first time in months. The personality changes stopped. The unexpected knowledge about traditional practices disappeared. Most importantly, the nightly out-of-body experiences ended. Mama Nakato gave her specific instructions for protecting her sleeping space. Never sleep with your head pointing toward any doorway or opening. Position your bed so your head faces a solid wall. Place protective herbs near the entrance to your room and perform weekly cleansing rituals. Most importantly, understand that Western medicine and traditional healing must work together, not in competition. Today, Sarah continues her public health work with a completely transformed approach. She now integrates traditional healing practices with conventional medicine and regularly consults with both medical specialists and traditional healers when developing health programs. "I learned that there are aspects of health and healing that medical school doesn't teach," she says. "My scientific training helps me understand how to treat disease, but traditional wisdom helps me understand how to maintain balance between the physical and spiritual aspects of health." Sarah's experience taught her a profound lesson about the relationship between Western medicine and traditional healing. In African spirituality, proper sleeping arrangements aren't just about physical rest, they're about maintaining control over your own consciousness and protecting your mind from influences that exist beyond the material world. These 4 accounts from Lagos, Johannesburg, Accra, and Kampala represent different regions, different cultures, and different types of people: a psychology student, a mining engineer, a high school teacher, and a public health doctor. But they all learned the same fundamental truth. In African spiritual tradition, your sleeping position isn't just about comfort, security, or even health, it's about maintaining sovereignty over your own consciousness. The stories share common elements that reflect authentic African spiritual beliefs documented across the continent. The vulnerability of consciousness during sleep. The significance of doorways as thresholds between physical and spiritual realms. The reality of entities that exist beyond our material understanding but can influence our thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Most importantly, these accounts demonstrate that traditional African wisdom and modern knowledge don't have to be in conflict. The psychology student learned to integrate scientific understanding with spiritual protection. The engineer discovered that technical expertise works best when combined with ancestral wisdom. The teacher found that education is most effective when it includes traditional knowledge. The aid worker realized that healing requires both medical science and spiritual balance. In each case, the solution involved more than just repositioning a bed. It required recognizing that African traditional beliefs represent thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about how consciousness, spirituality, and the physical world interact. It meant understanding that the ancestors who developed these sleeping protocols did so because they learned often through terrifying experience what happens when spiritual protection is ignored. The next time you prepare for sleep, especially if you're in Africa or working with African communities, remember these stories. Consider the wisdom of positioning your head away from doorways and other thresholds. Think about the spiritual significance of sleep as a time when consciousness becomes vulnerable to influences beyond our normal understanding. And if local people warn you about sleeping arrangements, listen to them. Their advice isn't based on superstition, it's based on generations of experience with spiritual realities that modern education is only beginning to acknowledge. Because in African tradition, the night belongs to forces that operate by rules different from our daytime understanding of reality. And if you want to wake up as yourself, unchanged and uninfluenced by entities that have no business in your mind, you need to show proper respect for the spiritual protocols that have protected people for millennia. Sleep safely. Position yourself correctly. Listen to the wisdom of those who came before you. Because once something else takes up residence in your consciousness, getting yourself back becomes the hardest problem you'll ever have to solve.